this session, we look at how you can work with your teams and have your teams work together to build out a strongly protected application. We'll consider a number of different things here, including the sort of considerations that both the CEO and the corporate hierarchy need to consider when building out a secure enterprise. And then move on to how to prevent PeopleSoft from becoming collateral damage. We look at the elements of a security infrastructure, that's the architecture. And then we've got some samples that you ask yourself and your staff in terms of how you are protecting your environment. IT security is not just for the IT department. It has a broader scope in terms of responsibility and consideration. The consequences of the loss of security, they don't have to be considered or discussed at a technical level in the boardroom, but they should be a topic for discussion. Some of the contributing effects on the organization from the loss of security are the effect on the brand, the corporate brand, the loss of consumer and user confidence in the organization's ability to protect data, and the consequential loss diminishes the value, that's the share price of the organization. There are real consequences for the loss of security in the organization. Data loss, for instance, has a real effect on the bottom line through loss of business and the reparation expense when users have their details compromised. We have the view that all of these hackers are the shady individuals working in attics or basements surrounded by flickering screens. But all hackers are not black hats. There are many criminal organizations. There are individuals with a view on how the world should work called hacktivists, and then there's whistleblowers who work for a company and decide that they need to expose what's going on in the company. And then there's the deliberate and inadvertent insider abuse. These are the people who leave USB sticks full of data on a train behind them, or who actually harvest data for their own advancement. Vulnerabilities keep changing, and each new technology opens new attack vectors. And regardless of company size, it's likely that you've already been attacked, and in a lot of cases don't even realize it. It takes something like 150 days to discover a breach. As well as viruses, malware, and malicious software, you have to consider the risks imposed by the use of smartphone, tablets, and cloud computing. Because of the government and industry mandates, there is a significant drive towards compliance and compliance certification. The compliance certification is point in time, and typically certifications are engaged for the project during the course of the compliance certification. And this is usually done on an annual basis, and this is a very significant effort. But security has to be an ongoing effort. It doesn't stop. There is no point in time where you can say, we are now secure. You have to keep investigating and reviewing the standards that we put in place. It's easy to believe that security can get in the way of productivity, and there's always that balance. Smartphones and tablets have brought about a scenario where we're effectively able to work anywhere. But we have to be sure that these tools, we're not introducing security risks, and that the data is not leaving on those devices for later dissemination. Security is not just a technology problem, because all security is based on people, processes, and technology. And the biggest risk to an organization is the behavior of the people inside. So how do you encourage and build an environment that uses a strong company-wide employee education on top of that effective technology and effective technology leadership within IT? Because security is an enterprise-wide responsibility, the CEO has a very significant role in ensuring that security. Security itself has to be top of mind in terms of in the corporate hierarchy, so that's all the way down. Through the rest of this presentation, I've got some suggestions as to how you can make improvements in the organizational security by collaboration and working with the rest of the teams. When we start considering how to improve security in general in the organization, one of the first topics is collaboration. This is collaboration between the application IT people, the networking and tech stack IT people as well, all of whom have security as part of their responsibilities, but get them working together to develop a robust corporate and enterprise-wide security. Part of the way of doing this is to establish virtual teams between those different groups. Then there's the need for processes. There's the different processes that need to be put in place. These need to be tested and updated on a regular basis to make sure that they continue to be relevant. It's also useful to consider creating a system health dashboard. This could either be done manually or done by pulling data from the different elements in the stack to build out something like an Excel spreadsheet or a health dashboard with gauges and blocks, so that there's a visual indication as to what's going on in the system. In terms of the CPUs that Oracle releases, this is the critical patch updates that Oracle releases on a quarterly basis. It's worthwhile developing weighted values for the elements of the stack in which become more important, and those weightings then are multiplied by or incremented by the CVSS. That's the scoring that's attached to each CPU fix. And with the increasing spread of phishing as a way of attacking systems, then there's the creating an awareness program among your users to recognize phishing attempts and report those phishing attempts, and then to use the capabilities within the technology to create protection around the email servers and those phishing attempts. In this diagram, we look at some high-level overview of where most of the threats are likely to occur. So typically we've got PIA, which is the online access into PeopleSoft. Mobile, which has an overlay with some of PIA, but has its own separate set of issues as well. Email, which is becoming the predominant method for hackers to gain access to systems. And obviously associated with email then is the email server and how that's protected. But if you look at the PeopleSoft environment, we've got the WebLogic, the Java server, and any proxies that are associated with it, and the Tuxedo application server. And this will refer to as the PeopleSoft stack. And then the PeopleSoft database, which has its own methods for protection. And then we look at the network, the overall network as well. This diagram is an approach to recognizing the elements of the threats in the system and recognizing where we can put protection in place to create a robust security architecture. For instance, if we take mobile, some of the concerns are how to detect jailbroken devices, how to detect devices that have rogue apps running on them, recognizing that the mobile applications operating systems themselves are very leaky, and then how do we recognize attempts to access the system coming in from untrusted networks. Part of the mitigation here is by running some sort of service which fingerprints the access attempts and then can issue additional identity validation when the attempt is coming in from an unrecognized source. Part of the resolution for that is by implementing some form of mobile application management solution in the mobile stack. For PA, which is the traditional PeopleSoft Internet architecture, mainly we're mainly looking at things like the workstations and laptops that are supplied from the organization itself, so they're managed and supplied from the organization. And some of the concerns are ensuring all the time that the antivirus and malware protection is up to date. Again, similar than inappropriate access by the users and attempts to access the system from untrusted networks. This is where users have taken their laptops outside of the organization firewalls. And part of the mitigation here is to establish some form of software asset audit, making sure that there are no programs running on those devices that shouldn't be running out that are likely to be damaging to the system. Creating some sort of web application or ERP firewall framework to protect the system. Looking at URL request filters, the URL request filter is part of a solution to make sure that people who are accessing self-service from outside the network are only accessing those self-service services. And then some form of site advisor. This is a solution whereby if a user attempts to click on a link that has been recognized as a dangerous link, the site advisor pops up a window saying that that user must determine what that URL is, and if it's required, then to talk to the system administrators about adding the URL to a set of whitelist. And then email protection. Email is becoming one of the major vectors into an organization. And the concerns here are around phishing, which has a number of vectors, including compromising the user credentials and allowing malware to be loaded into the back-end system. This destroys both the security and the brand of the organization. It has the potential anyway to compromise the security and the brand. And some of the areas for mitigation here are the email protection around DMARC, SPF and DKIM, ensuring DNS security, and again the site advisor making sure that when users click on links that they're going to links that are approved by the organization. If we then look at network protection, part of the concerns here are internal abuse, users establishing rogue web servers on the network to effectively derail traffic within the network, so sending spurious requests to other users to get them to log on to their web server. And then just the whole approach of sniffing the traffic on the network. If the traffic on the network internally is not encrypted, then sniffing will expose the usernames, passwords, and maybe even high privilege usernames and passwords. And part of the mitigation there is routing and virtual IPs to make sure that the internal traffic is only going where it's supposed to be going. To have some form of IPS and IDS, that's intrusion prevention and intrusion detection systems on the internal network. Coming back to the software asset management, making sure that abusive internal insiders are not installing rogue software on any of the servers. Making sure that the firewalls are appropriately configured. As far as possible then, encrypting the traffic internally, like PeopleSoft supports SSL from the browser into the backend database. So all of that data in flight can be protected in PeopleSoft. And then making sure that we establish some form of console audit. This is where users can access the OS directly on the servers. For the PeopleSoft stack in general, again, one of the major concerns is internal abuse. And the way that we can mitigate against that is by having some form of governance, risk and compliance solution in place. Making sure that we're doing some robust log analysis. This is extracting the data from the wealth, or extracting information from the wealth of data that's coming out of the log files from each of the servers. Implementing some form of security incident event management solution. Application monitoring. The part of the value of application monitoring is it's 5 o'clock in the morning and nobody's supposed to be on the system, but suddenly hundreds of JVMs start firing up, which indicates some level of work going on in the system that we're not in control of. And then solutions like Oracle Identity Management, which establishes a discipline around the roles and permissions of users being provisioned into the system. In terms of the database, there's the database is well documented in terms of the concerns and mitigations. But again, we look here at the internal abuse. This is rogue administrators harvesting data from the database directly, bypassing all of the other controls. Part of the mitigation is to have some form of DB firewall that examines the requests that are going to the database and the source of those requests within the network. TDA is a form of it's an acronym for Transparent Data Encryption. This encrypts data at rest on the database, so anybody who is attempting to access the data forensically by directly accessing the data files or the backup media will be hampered by the fact that the data has been encrypted. Audit Vault is a solution to audit the access attempts and recognize anomalies in those accesses. So typically a user who might handle, say, 100 vouchers a day suddenly starts handling or appears to be handling thousands of vouchers per day. That could be a data harvesting attempt either on the part of that user or somebody who has compromised that user's credentials. And DB Vault is an Oracle feature which creates realms within the database. So the administrators have limited management access within the tables and the database, but don't have access to the underlying user data. There's a document on my Oracle support, 1353627.1, which lists the Oracle security products which will enhance PeopleSoft security. The reason they're included there is so that you can use the features that are delivered in those products as a template for your choice of products to manage the security within the system. Finally, as part of building out that strategy for establishing a secure enterprise, these are the sort of questions that you can ask internally. The answers should be available and they should be definable and documented to some extent. My tagline here is why is security like Fight Club, and the first rule of Fight Club is you don't talk about Fight Club. In security, we're typically reticent to discuss the security of the system because we see that as effectively leaking data. But internally in an organization, we have to be able to discuss openly about the security that we have in place and where we see the risks in the current environment. The check engine light graphic is here because you can run with the check engine light for a long time in a car before anything goes wrong. And the same is true for security. You can avoid doing anything about security for a long time, and apparently nothing happens until something happens, and then it can be quite catastrophic. So the sort of questions that need to be asked are things like how often does the security team, particularly the application and stack security team, review the critical patch updates that are delivered by Oracle on a quarterly basis to examine how they apply to you and how important they are within the system. On December of 2015, the certificate authorities have stopped supplying SHA-2 or SHA-1 certificates. And these are the certificates that have been used to protect SSL type traffic within the system and for other protection within the system. The certificate authorities are now only producing SHA-256 certificates, or commonly called SHA-2 certificates. If you're dependent on certificates and you haven't started updating your SHA-1 certificates to SHA-2 certificates, you're very quickly going to come to the point where the certificates are going to expire and you're not going to be protected. Then masking or hiding data that's been displayed on the system. So sensitive data that's being displayed on user systems where those users don't actually need access to that sensitive data. How are you managing the display of that? When you create copies of production data and you deploy them in your test and development environments, are you scrambling or de-identifying that data? Otherwise, all of your developers and testers all have access to live production data because the security tends to be relaxed in the test and development systems. So you need to consider how you're going to protect that data. And having a single sign-on system, some form of access management system where PeopleSoft is part of that protected environment. Most of the access management systems are mistakenly called single sign-on, but they're actually policy managed access systems. So you can create policies around the types of access that a user has. And this goes beyond or extends the application security. And then federated solutions allow you to have multi-domain single sign-on and access. This is typically put in place where you have a mixture or a hybrid of on-premise equipment or on-premise systems, hosted systems, or even cloud-based systems. You have to be considering a federated identity solution. As we've discussed to some extent during this session, mobile devices, because the relative immaturity of the devices and the operating systems themselves and the protection available within the system, mobile devices like smartphones and tablets can be a significant vector into the back-end system. Even with VPN and SSL, if I'm able to compromise the device, then my compromise will travel across that VPN network. So the VPN is not protecting the back-end system from a compromised device. Having an ERP or a web application firewall with the system is going to further protect and extend the security within the application. ERP firewall and the mobile access management system or mobile application management system will do fingerprinting on the device and the access attempt and be able to detect anomalies as a consequence. A lot of our customers use F5's Big IP as a load balancer, but the features of products like the F5 Big IP go beyond simple load balancing. These products have programming languages built into them, which allow you, again, to extend the filtering and protection capabilities within the load balancer itself. And then lastly, you need to make sure that you have processes in place and documented and updated on a regular basis to keep alignment with the changing environment and the changing threats. So security policy, a breach notification policy. What happens when you've detected a breach? Breach management policy. That's to do with the mandates, both federal and industry mandates that are in place. And then having a log analysis solution, something that's going to take all of that information coming from the various servers and create some sort of manageable information from that so that it becomes meaningful rather than megabytes of text that somebody has to plow through. While we don't accommodate question and answers in this session, this is a good point to just remind you that if you do have questions about this, first of all, this is the first part of a series. We'll be going on and discussing people tool security in more detail as we go through the series. But feel free to contact any member of the strategy team or your support analyst or any of your contact points within Oracle to discuss system security further.